Time for the latest all-new installment of our Morning Joe Summer Book Series. Today we take a look at life in New York City through the eyes of a one-of-a-kind, famed author Jay McInerney. His new book, How It Ended, a collection of short stories.
Jay, How It Ended.
How does it end?
It got such a remarkable review, not only from the New York Times, but also so many other book review sources. Were you blown away by how positively it was accepted?
I was, because I just sort of imagined that a book of short stories might pass relatively unnoticed into the night.
Do you think the reaction came because it took people back over the past 20 years, back to the 80s, back to the 90s, back to their own personal struggles that you chronicle here?
I like to think so. You know, I also think if you last long enough, you'll be forgiven for almost anything. But
there's hope.
But the book does span my career, including the story which became the first chapter of my novel Bright Lights, Big City. I guess it's kind of a greatest hits.
Well, and actually it reads like Richard's life.
Yeah, it does.
Chronicles your work from the last 25 years.
And
Stories
Richard's
revolve
last
around
book.
party mentality, drugs, infidelity, social climbing. Richard Haas.
I remember you from CBGB's, right?
Cute.
1981 in the bathroom, right?
New York has changed an awful lot, though. You talk about CBGBs. There was this sort of dirty grittiness, and sometimes you hear the old timers with tattoos and long faces whining about the gentrification of New York City. Do you miss the New York of the 1980s? Are you glad we are where we are?
Well, you know, it's hard not to be stricken by the incredible difference. When I came here, the subways were not functional. Everything was covered with graffiti. Crime was rampant. My apartment was broken into constantly. Was getting mugged fun? Was having your car stolen fun? And having junkies climb in your window at 3 in the morning?
It doesn't sound like
that
fun.
wasn't that great.
You don't miss it. Don't miss it.
I'm thinking you're okay.
But you know, on the other hand, some things about New York haven't changed. My Bright Lights, Big City, the book I wrote about that era, is actually being remade. There was a 1988 movie,
right?
And Josh Schwartz, who is the creator of Gossip Girl and The OC, and Chuck, who's moving into film, had told me many years ago that when I met him that he wanted to remake Bright Lights, Big City, and he went back and forth about whether to set it in the 80s or the present. And at first it seemed so clear that it was a book about the 80s, but he said, you know, he finally called me up one day and he said, you know, young people still come to New York with their dreams. They still go out late at night. Forgive me for saying so, but cocaine does not seem to have subsided as a phenomenon. People still, you know, young people are still flocking here with their dreams.
Young people are still young people.
Even if it's less affordable.
Let's ask Richard. Is that
your
true?
thoughts?
Is that true, Richard?
As a father of 2 teenagers, I hope not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go into the book a little bit more, though. Is there a short story that you wrote, got it published, went back and did a reread, that really jumps out at you and you say, okay, I got that right. Wow, that one's pretty good. Is there one that stands out with you?
Well, I think my favorite in that book is called The Last Bachelor, and it's basically about a character who went through the party life in the 80s, and then he kept at it in the 90s and almost beyond. And he was the last guy left at the party, and he went from being a charming playboy to almost being a joke among his peers as they married and had children and moved on. And this guy was still dating the girls the same age as he was dating 30 years before.
Oh boy!
And
we all know these guys.
And you kind of envy a guy like that, and you also kind of feel sorry for him.
You envy him, but again, he goes from being the young, suave character to being like Cheever's swimmer at the end.
That's a very good analogy.
Sort of stumbling
and
around.
finally, some of the young girls are like laughing behind his back.
When you set out to write, do you set out to write a short story, or does it just turn out to be a novel that turns into a short story?
Sometimes I'm hoping. I set out to write a short story because it's so daunting to think about writing a novel. If you think, okay, I'm going to put my next year and a half into this project, and then sometimes it's just too hard to even get out of bed. So I often start pretending that I'm writing a short story and hoping that it turns into a novel. You trick yourself.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like, it's like, you know.
You do that
I
every
trick
morning.
myself every morning.
It's like
I'm truly happy.
a
and
short
this
story is a
nice
one-night
little
stand, you know,
broadcast.
and a novel is like a marriage. You got to really.
But
You have to
sometimes,
commit for a whole year.
I know.
That's tough.
but it works both ways, though, right?
Sometimes longer.
Yeah, sometimes something you think is going to be a great novel becomes a really good short story, and sometimes that short story just keeps going until
Sometimes
it
short stories are just failed novels that
Okay.
refuse to grow. But I really love them, and I think that I keep waiting for the short story form to undergo this big revival because, frankly, it's the perfect length for our time. You know, it's a good length for the internet age, for the TV age.
Chris keeps telling me you have to go, but let's end on that point that the short story never gets respect. Unless you want to talk about Cheever or Chekhov. There aren't a lot of people that write short stories. But this, I guess that's why the review surprised me so much in the Times. This is a group of short stories that has critical reviews, and I'm sure other people are thinking, I wonder if we can do what that doctor from Williams did.
Dr. J. McInerney, thank you so much. The book is How It Ended, New and Collected Stories. Richard Haas, thank you as well.
Always a pleasure.
Morning Joe will be right back.